In this video, we're going to learn some basic barista science about milk, how to heat and texture milk to form a delicious base for drinks, and how to pour it to make drinks look pretty. Before we start steaming and pouring milk, it's important to learn some basic milk chemistry and the rules that govern the way we treat milk when we steam it. As far as we're concerned as baristas, milk consists of three main components: sugars, proteins, and fats. Let's discuss each one and the role it plays in both preparation and taste. Let's start with sugars. The main sugar in milk is lactose and is actually very sweet. This explains why well-heated and textured cappuccinos and lattes often don't need extra sugar to taste sweet. This plays a role in the temperature of our beverages because we want to taste every bit of sweetness we can pull out of the milk. Imagine a fresh, piping hot piece of pizza. If you put it in your mouth immediately, all you taste is heat and pain. If you let that same pizza cool a little though, you can taste everything that's delicious and wonderful about melted cheese and saucy bread. By the same logic then, you don't want your lattes to be too hot to taste all that lovely lactose. Next up are proteins. Proteins begin as coiled balls in cold milk, and through the addition of heat, uncoil to expose a hydrophilic or water-loving end and hydrophobic or water-hating end. When we pull air into the milk with the steam wand, the hydrophobic ends of the proteins will hide from the water in the milk inside the air bubble, causing the hydrophilic ends to form a barrier around the bubble, keeping its shape. This is known as a surfactant. The surfactant qualities of proteins are what holds the air bubbles together to create milk foam, and will keep its shape until about 160 degrees, at which point the proteins will fall apart or denature. This causes the air bubbles the proteins are holding to pop, and the milk foam to deteriorate. Yet another reason we don't want to steam too hot. Our third and final milk component is fat. Fats affect the thickness of the milk and quality and longevity of the foam. The more fat present in the milk, the thicker the liquid and the longer the foam will last. Imagine milk foam as a series of bubbles stacked on top of one another. In between each one of these bubbles is a tiny space that will let liquid fall through it. The more fat present in the milk, the thicker that liquid will be, and the longer it will take to fall between the gaps in the bubbles, creating a stiff, dry layer of foam on top of liquid milk. The other effect fats have on the steaming process is that it gives the hydrophobic parts of proteins another option to hide inside. The less fat present in milk, the more the proteins will focus on the air we inject, creating larger amounts of foam. Now that we've talked about the three main components in milk, let's discuss four key temperatures and how they affect each component. Our first temperature is 40 degrees, or right out of the fridge. At this point, the sugars are too cold to really taste, the proteins are in coiled balls, and the fats are in solid globules. Let's add some heat and see what happens. Next up is 100 degrees, or about people temperature. Here, the sugars are just starting to get yummy, the proteins are uncoiling, and the fats are melting into oils. Because the fats are going from a solid to a liquid, it gives the proteins another option of something to grab onto, disrupting foam formation. It's for this reason that we want to stop adding air when the milk reaches 100 degrees, when it's just starting to feel warm. At 140 degrees, the sugars are in full effect, the proteins are uncoiled, and all the fats have turned to oil. This is our ideal tasting temperature, so stop the steaming process once the milk is 140 degrees or too hot to touch. At 160 degrees, the sugars are too hot to taste, the proteins are denaturing, and the fats, well, I guess they're doing just fine. At this point, not only is the milk not sweet and the foam starting to fail, but the taste of denatured protein is bitter and eggy, a poor complement to espresso. Now that we have a basic understanding of the rules behind milk steaming, let's talk about the process. The first step in steaming perfectly textured milk for an espresso beverage is to determine the right amount of cold milk to pour into the appropriately sized pitcher for that drink. The final volume of milk in the pitcher after steaming should equal the volume of the drink you're about to pour. And with about an ounce of espresso already taking up room in the cup, this should leave you with an ounce of milk left over in the pitcher when you're through pouring. For lattes, we want 25% aeration, and for cappuccinos, 50%. Therefore, the amount of cold milk you pour into the pitcher at the start should be such that after aeration, you've attained the volume of the drink you're about to pour. Now let's go through each base espresso drink from smallest to largest and talk about how much cold milk to pour into which pitcher for that drink. Let's start with cappuccinos and cortados to stay. In most steaming pitchers, the bottom of the spout indicates the halfway point for the total volume of the pitcher. Therefore, for this 6-ounce drink, pour in 3 ounces of cold milk to reach halfway to the bottom of the spout. After aeration, the foam should reach the bottom of the spout, totaling 6 ounces of aerated milk at 50%, just enough to fill the cup. For 8-ounce cappuccinos to go, pour in 4 ounces of cold milk to reach just below the bottom of the spout. After aeration, the milk should reach halfway up the spout, totaling 8 ounces of aerated milk at 50%. For an 8-ounce latte to go, pour 6 ounces of cold milk into a 12-ounce steaming pitcher to reach the bottom of the spout. After aeration, the milk should reach halfway up the spout for 8 ounces of total steamed milk aerated at 25%. For a 12-ounce latte, pour 9 ounces of cold milk into a 20-ounce steaming pitcher to reach just below the bottom of the spout. After aeration, the milk should reach a quarter of the way up the spout, totaling 12 ounces of steamed milk at 25% aeration. For a 16-ounce latte, use a 20-ounce steaming pitcher and pour in 12 ounces of cold milk to reach just above the bottom of the spout. After aeration, the milk should reach 3/4 of the way up the spout for 16 ounces of steamed milk aerated at 25%. Because steaming pitchers taper up from the bottom, it will appear as though you have more foam in this size than others. Last but not least, for a 20-ounce latte, use a 36-ounce steaming pitcher and pour in 16 ounces of cold milk to reach just below the bottom of the spout. After aeration, the milk should reach a quarter of the way up the spout, totaling 20 ounces of steamed milk aerated at 25%. Now that we know the percentages of aeration for lattes and cappuccinos and which pitchers to use for which drinks, let's talk about the mechanics of using the espresso machine's steam wand to create perfectly textured milk. We'll do these demonstrations with milk enough for a 12-ounce latte. So we'll begin by using a 20-ounce steaming pitcher and filling it with 9 ounces of cold milk to reach just below the bottom of the spout. At the machine, begin by opening the steam valve for at least 1 second to remove any condensation from inside the steam wand and prevent injecting your milk with water. Next, position the steam wand at a 10 to 20 degree angle straight out from the machine. This will position all the holes in the steam wand tip at a downward angle, allowing it to pull air into the milk instead of skipping it across the surface. Next, submerge the steam wand into the milk just to the point where the steam wand tip screws into the steam wand itself. This will allow you to open the steam valve all the way without immediately pulling in air. Tilt the pitcher slightly to one side or the other, allowing the angle of the steam wand to push the milk in a circular motion around the pitcher. This allows you to control the high water mark in the pitcher and inject air only when you choose to. In one motion, open the steam valve all the way and lower the pitcher until you hear the steam wand start to pull air into the milk. The proper amount of aeration should sound like constant paper tearing. If it sounds like an intermittent chirp, it means you're not adding enough air and should lower the pitcher more. If it sounds like TV static, you're adding too much air and should raise the pitcher slightly. Continue to consistently add air until the side of the pitcher feels at all warm to the touch, or you have the appropriate amount of aeration, whichever comes first. To stop aerating, raise the pitcher just enough to resubmerge the holes in the tip of the steam wand. Hold this position, allowing the steam wand to heat and swirl the milk in the pitcher until it is 140 degrees or too hot to touch. Once the milk is hot enough, turn off the steam valve in one motion, lower the pitcher to the counter, purge out any residual milk on the inside of the steam wand, and thoroughly clean the outside of the steam wand with a damp cloth. Now let's see the entire process live from two different angles. Even if everything goes perfectly, there might be some small blemishes on the surface of the milk when you're through. So tap the pitcher on a hard surface to pop any visible bubbles, and swirl the milk for at least 3 seconds until it's glossy and shiny, like wet paint or marshmallow fluff. So far, we've seen what happens when things go well. So now, let's see what happens when we add not enough and too much air. If you don't add enough air before the milk reaches 100 degrees, there won't be enough foam present in the milk to buffer the sound of aeration, causing it to screech in pain as you steam it. The end result is aerated milk with a thin, watery texture and bubbles that won't pop out when you tap the pitcher. Another result of not aerating enough is that the milk won't expand. This means that you won't have enough steamed milk in the pitcher to fill the customer's cup. If you add too much air, the amount of foam you're creating will buffer the sound of steaming entirely, making the whole process whisper quiet. The result is thick, pillowy foam that stiffens quickly and is difficult to pour. So far, we've talked about some basic milk chemistry and the rules that govern the way we treat milk when we steam it. We've also discussed good techniques to steam appropriate amounts of milk into a delicious, well-textured base for lattes and cappuccinos. So now, without further ado, let's finally get to the reason you skipped ahead to this part of the video: latte art. A good way to think about latte art is like plating for a chef. You've taken your time to craft a delicious shot of espresso, and you've played by all the rules we've talked about so far to create a perfectly textured milk base that will taste great with it. Latte art is your chance to grab the customer's attention and communicate to them that this drink is going to be amazing. The first variable we'll talk about is height, or the distance of the spout of the pitcher from the surface of the liquid in the cup. Imagine a bubble of milk foam as a white ball we're dropping into a colored liquid. If the ball is submerged in the liquid, it will be stained that color when it bobs back up to the surface. Whereas if the ball remains on the surface of the liquid, it will stay white. Dropping the ball from higher up guarantees that it will submerge when it hits the liquid. Whereas dropping it from lower will keep it on the surface. The goal of any latte art design is a crisp white design on a dark brown surface. To accomplish this contrast, we want to be mindful of 3 main heights that we can control while pouring. The first is 3 inches above the surface of the liquid in the cup. This will cause the milk foam to plunge below the surface of the espresso, keeping the surface of the liquid in the cup dark brown. The second important height is about 1 inch above the liquid in the cup. This will cause some of the foam to submerge and some to float, resulting in an undesirable hazy beige color. The way to make sure your design is crisp white is to keep the spout of the pitcher within a 1/4 inch of the liquid in the cup when pouring the design. Just like in the ball analogy, pouring with the spout of the pitcher this close to the liquid in the cup prevents the foam from submerging below the espresso and allows it to retain its vibrant white color. In order to get as close as possible as soon as possible, tilt the cup at a 30 to 45 degree angle and make sure the pitcher is touching the lip of the cup the entire time you're forming the design. Watch what happens when the cup is kept flat and the pitcher rests on the rim of the cup. First, nothing appears, then beige, then crisp white as the liquid in the cup approaches the spout of the pitcher. Now here's what to do to control this process. Begin by tilting the cup about 45 degrees and start pouring from a height of above 3 inches to fill the cup without having any design show up on the surface. As soon as the liquid reaches the rim of the cup, stop pouring to avoid the beige area entirely and touch the pitcher to the rim of the cup. Quickly resume pouring with the pitcher touching the cup to pour a crisp white design. Be sure to slowly untilt the cup to keep from spilling as it fills. A good rule of thumb here is that if any beige appears in your design, that means the spout of the pitcher was not within a 1/4 inch of the liquid in the cup, meaning that either the cup was not tilted enough to let the pitcher reach the liquid, or the pitcher was not touching the rim of the cup. The next variable we have to tackle is changing the flow rate from the pitcher and how that corresponds to building surface tension in the cup. As we pour milk and foam into the cup, surface tension begins to build, starting with very low surface tension when the cup is empty, and high surface tension once the cup is full. As a result, the sooner you begin a design, the more the design can flow across the cup. The later you begin a design, the smaller and more compressed it will be. To pour large designs that fill the cup entirely, tilt the cup aggressively and bring the pitcher down to the rim of the cup as soon as the liquid reaches the rim. Because you've begun the design when the surface tension is relatively low, it will allow it to flow across the cup before the surface tension is high enough to compress it. Now that we've talked about the timing aspect of surface tension, let's discuss the flow rate aspect. Because surface tension is building as we fill the cup, it's important to continue to increase the rate of pour from the pitcher to keep designs flowing. Begin designs with a relatively low flow rate and continue to pour faster as the design progresses to keep the design flowing across the cup and prevent foam from piling up at the spout of the pitcher. Here is an example of starting the design portion of a pour as soon as possible after the fill portion. Note how it affects the design on the surface, making it nice and big. Now watch what happens when you fill for longer and start the design later in the pour. The design on the surface looks small and compressed, like it never got a chance to flow across the cup because we began the design when the surface tension was high. In each pour, note how the flow rate from the pitcher increases steadily as the design progresses. Now that we've talked about height and the surface tension flow rate connection, the final core variable we have to understand is the position of the pitcher in the cup. To understand where to place the pitcher, let's first talk about how milk flows from the pitcher and around the cup. Similar to blowing up a balloon, the design is going to form in front of the pitcher, traveling down towards the bottom of the cup and then circling back up and around. With that in mind, imagine a crosshairs in the cup. The way to pour a centered design is to place the spout of the pitcher slightly above the center, allowing the balloon to fill up below the spout. If the spout is placed in the center of the cup, the balloon will fill toward the bottom, leaving the top half empty. If the spout of the pitcher is placed towards the top of the cup, the foam will run towards the bottom but won't circle back around, creating a long shape instead of a nice circle. If the spout is placed on either side of the cup, it will create a current, carrying the design around and making one side larger than the other. First, let's see what happens when we place the spout of the pitcher too low in the cup, right in the center of the crosshairs. Note that the design fills at the bottom of the cup, leaving the top empty. Next, let's see what happens when the spout is placed too high in the cup. Note that the design runs out of energy before it reaches the bottom of the cup and is long and weird looking instead of nice and round. Now let's see what happens when the pitcher is placed on one side of the cup or the other. Note the current that forms in a spiral around the cup, carrying the design with it and making one side larger than the other. To help with consistency while you're learning, when you find a good position, take note of where the spout of the pitcher rests on the rim of the cup. For the purpose of this design and other round designs, once the pitcher touches the cup, maintain that position throughout the design. Letting the pitcher drag backwards across the cup as you untilt will cause a stacked triangular shape instead of keeping it nice and round. So far in these examples, we've been pouring a traditional cappuccino design referred to as a monk's head. While a monk's head is perfectly fine in its own right, let's put a tail at the bottom to transform it into a solid heart shape. To accomplish this, start by forming a good solid monk's head by following the steps we've talked about so far. When the cup is almost full, raise the pitcher back to the 3-inch mark to stop actively forming a design, and slowly move the stream of milk to the bottom of the cup, drawing the monk's head to a point forming the tail of the heart. When you reach the bottom of the cup, abruptly stop pouring to finish the design. This technique is referred to as the draw-through and will finish most common latte art designs. When performing any draw-through, make sure to cross back into the 3-inch mark or you'll drag a line of foam through the design. Also, be careful to decrease your flow rate and move slowly through the center of the design to prevent from sinking the design below the surface or dragging it to the bottom of the cup. At this point in the process, we've learned to pour a clearly recognizable, sought-after piece of latte art, the solid heart. Congrats! It is strongly advisable that you stop here and perfect this design before moving on. A good barista should have at least one design that can pour reliably for customers, instead of pouring poorly executed designs for them while they practice. Now that we can consistently pour a solid heart, let's give it some pizzazz and learn how to add texture or ripples to a design. To add even layers to a design, maintain a consistent flow rate from the pitcher and add a very slight back and forth motion with your wrist. This will cause the milk to start to swing in a pendulum motion inside the pitcher. Note how even and consistent the rocking motion is of the milk inside the pitcher, and how little the pitcher is actually moving to accomplish this. Because you're spreading the stream of milk out over a wider area, the actual force of the milk is lessened, so it's important to keep your flow rate high and not lose momentum as you pour the design. The goal is to have a consistent, even pendulum motion from the milk in the pitcher and avoid twitchiness by keeping your flow rate consistent and your motions even. Here we'll use a consistent pendulum motion and even flow rate to pour a rippled heart. Do everything we've done previously to pour a great solid heart, but just add the pendulum motion from the pitcher. Here's what the same design looks like when you're twitchy and inconsistent. Honestly, this isn't the worst heart we've ever seen, but it's definitely not the consistent, even rippled heart we poured before, and this motion would be disastrous for other designs, as we'll see next. Now that we're comfortable pouring different types of hearts, let's use those skills to pour a more complex design. This next one's called a tulip because it resembles a cute cartoonish flower coming out of the ground. This is a great design for beginners because it gives you the chance to start and stop to correct any mistakes you've made throughout the pour. Begin by pouring a rippled heart shape in the center of the cup just like we've been doing. This time though, instead of drawing through the bottom, stop pouring abruptly when the top of the heart begins to take shape. Next, place the spout of the pitcher just above where the heart shape meets and pour a solid heart shape into the rippled base you just formed. If the cup is full at this point, simply lift the pitcher up and draw through into the base to finish the design. In this example, we still have some room in the cup, so we're going to add another layer just like we did before, by placing the spout of the pitcher just above where the base meets. After forming a solid heart shape at the top of the design, we're going to finish it off by performing a draw-through. A tulip gives you a lot of options because you can stop and start as many times as you want, adding as many layers as you have room for. Also, if you notice that your design is getting off center, you can correct that to a certain extent by placing your layers at different points in the cup. An important thing to keep in mind in this design is that the milk in the cup and in the pitcher is going to start to separate if it sits for any appreciable amount of time, so be sure to pause for as little time as possible in between layers so the foam remains fluid and pourable. In latte art, there are two main shapes we can form, and how we combine those shapes determines the design. Those shapes are heart shapes and leaf shapes. Heart shapes are formed by maintaining your position in the cup as you pour, or pushing forward slightly, resulting in the round shape we've been pouring so far in this video. Leaf shapes, on the other hand, are formed by pulling the pitcher backwards as you pour, causing the lines to stack up instead of curling around. Let's employ this new technique to form a design called a rosetta. A rosetta is a much more difficult design to pour because it involves a lot of movement and doesn't give you much time to assess and adjust mid-pour. Don't be frustrated if this design takes a while to get down, and remember not to practice on customers. A great looking solid heart always looks better than a rickety rosetta. We're going to start the rosetta just like we started the rippled heart and the tulip, by placing the spout of the pitcher just above the center of the liquid in the cup, and rocking the pitcher side to side gently to form a consistent, even pendulum motion. Just like in the tulip, we're watching for the top of the heart shape to begin to form before we make a change. This time though, instead of stopping the pour abruptly, we're going to slowly move the pitcher backwards towards the top of the cup, while keeping our flow rate consistent and our pendulum motion even. Make sure not to lessen your flow rate or make any jerky motions with the pitcher at this point, as that will result in twitchy looking uneven leaves. When the spout of the pitcher reaches the top of the cup, hold that position until the cup is full to form a solid heart shape. Once the cup is full, gently perform a draw through to knit the leaves together, pouring through the center to finish the design. Now we've covered all the basic techniques and shapes to pour great latte art. Once you're comfortable with everything we've covered so far, feel free to get creative and combine these designs and techniques in different ways. Remember though that with great latte art comes great responsibility. And when you pour something gorgeous for a customer, you're promising them that you've done all the work up until that point to make sure their drink is going to taste just as good as it looks.